So imagine you're enjoying something a whole lot and you think that nothing can go wrong, but then something comes in out of nowhere and takes it away from you. Well, we have ourselves a Killjoy. I did do a list like this 4 years ago, but that list was really terrible. So I decided to remake it. I wanted to do a worst water levels list, but I just wanted to vent on more steam, so that list will probably be saved for the end of summer. As for now, this list is going to be ranked by not how bad they are, but by how much fun was ruined by the moment. I hope this countdown is better than my last attempt at a Killjoys list, because I thought more about my choices this time. So, get ready to endure the hardships of what I think are the top 10 biggest Killjoys. I thoroughly enjoyed Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon. Sure, they weren't as good as the first Sun and Moon, and they did have several bumps in the road, but for the most part, I had a lot of fun with this adventure, from beginning to end. The Rainbow Rocket chapter was also an interesting idea. While it did leave some things to be desired, it was still enjoyable. It was getting into it that matters. So you have a tag battle against Faba and another Aether employee, and we're teaming up with Lily. Looks like we get to see how far she's come. Lily sends out her Clefairy, which, while unevolved, seems like it's good enough to help you in this fight. There's one problem with it. It only knows one attacking move, that being Moonblast, which can only be used 15 times. And guess what Granbull and Scrafty's only moves are? Snarl, which not only inflicts damage, but even lowers special attack. So that admittedly powerful Moonblast will eventually become too weak. As a result, instead of actually cooperating, you're the one being forced to do all the work. I was actually rooting for Lily's Clefairy to faint so that she could send in another Pokemon. But that took too long since it also uses Light Screen and Reflect. Even if it's supposed to be a supporting Pokemon in this battle, it just ends up dragging out a 5-minute battle into almost 4 times that length. Oh, finally! Her Clefairy is down! Time for a chance to prove herself! Wait, don't tell me. Was Clefairy her only Pokemon? You can't be serious. Now, I can't be mad at Lily for this. She's a new trainer. It's obvious that becoming a Pokemon Master takes time. But when her Pokemon is already level 60, I think I prefer them bending logic a bit over making this feel more like 2 against 1 than an actual double battle. And it gets even longer when they get down to her last Pokemon, both of them which have the ability to put you to sleep, so even if one of them misses, the other will likely have you out like a light. As bad as Ultra Necrozma was, at least he had a cool design and a unique and completely epic battle theme, but this is just lousy. I'd put this much higher on the list, but unlike with some of the later entries, it's not one of the first things I think of when I hear the words Ultra Sun and Moon. But even saying that, how did they mess up an awesome setup this bad? I bet if you saw my original list, you might wish you could forget how bad that video was. One part that caused a lot of controversy was the number 1 entry, because people thought I was coming off like I don't care if Sid dies. I did care, I just didn't like the mission. But what I didn't realize was that you can get multiple fish at once, making this shorter. But I wouldn't know if I still think it's tedious even with this new info, since I only played through the game once. But mark my words, at least there's a much better excuse for existing than Ebot's Rock. In this dungeon, you find a treasure chest monster, and he won't let you pass until you feed him enough coral. But the treasure chest itself is just creepy. A talking, gluttonous, faceless treasure chest? That's horrific, and not in a good way. And at least with Sid, he had a good reason to need all that fish, because he was on the verge of death. But this thing is just a stupid creature that puts his hunger before everyone else. Don't you realize that we have to get past you in order to save the world? Isn't that a little bit more important than your selfish needs? Oh, I'm sorry, more important than your selfish wants? How about you go get your own coral? But how do you get the coral? By running around Ebot's cave looking for coral in infinitely respawning treasure chests. Which, by the way, you're being constantly hounded by random encounters while doing so. Not even the fishing segment made you put up with that. So you have to find out that you have to feed 22 pieces of coral to the chest, but he refuses to let you pass. So then naturally you might think you need to bring him 22 servings of it. You spend another 30 minutes doing this, and losing count while you're at it, until you find out that's still not enough. What do you actually have to do? You have to bring 22 pieces back all at once. Let me ask you this. How in the heck were we supposed to figure that out? You know what? Forget this stupid mission. I got a better idea. How about you take some of my fire magic instead, you stupid waste of life? I've said this plenty of times. Onyx and Veron would have been much better villains if they were the true villains of their games. However, I do have a couple new arguments to bring up, but first let's get my biggest problems with them out of the way, because there are some people who haven't seen me rant on this plot twist yet. Veron disrupted the flow of time and even gained the power to control time itself. Onyx buried and ruined an entire temple, causing all the seasons to fall into disarray. Two of the most awesome conflicts in any Zelda game, and they were done for the sake of reviving Ganon. This entire time they were serving Twinrova, aka Kotaki and Kalm, and only doing this to light the flames of destruction and despair. That's a stupid concept. These guys were awesome villains on their own. They already seem like they could be some of the most evil villains in the franchise. We don't need them to be working for a bigger bad, especially since they had to go easy on us in their fights with us instead of actually using their full strength, since lighting the flames also required them to die because, I don't know. This revelation is one of the most insulting plot twists I've ever seen, especially since Kotaki and Kalm don't do anything anywhere near as scary as what Onyx and Veron did, aside from attempting to resurrect Ganon, who Link's already stopped before. So what makes this any different? Granted, he's harder here than he was there, because he ended up being brought back as a mindless monster, but the mindless monster bit wasn't even part of the plan. The Room of Rights isn't a good dungeon either. It's not intense, it's just another of those Lost Woods mazes, which usually end up being fake difficulty, and after you find out what to do, repeatedly going through it after you die just comes off as unnecessary filler. And even the music isn't that good. The three-phase final battle is pretty okay, but also a major downgrade from the Onyx and Veron fights. Onyx turned into one of the biggest bosses in the franchise prior to Breath of the Wild, and you face him by climbing onto his hands and then attacking. Veron had multiple different forms, making the battle feel more interesting. And this boss, well, he does make a cool distorted dimension, I guess. Now here's my idea for what this could have been. Maybe have Onyx and Veron survive their battles with Link and have them band together in the final fight, probably even fuse together to become a new monster that wants to destroy both time and seasons. Maybe even combine what made their fight so great. I'm sure something like that would be better than what they ended up doing. While this isn't one of the first things that comes to mind when I think of the Oracle games, it still kills my joy with what could have been epic villains. Now, I know I mostly regard this as a Killjoy for story purposes, but something doesn't have to be gameplay related in order to ruin my fun. The minigames in Sonic Advance 3 and Sonic Rush Adventure were definitely really bad. You're either doing annoying tasks to unlock a stage with terrible controls, or being repeatedly mocked by the lamest shark in the world, but neither of them get a spot on this list. Why? Well, because the egg saucer fight in Sonic Advance 2 came closer to making me hate this game. Keep in mind I said closer, not automatically making me hate it. But I was really close to rage quitting because while Egg Saucer is already a cheap boss, when facing it as Sonic, this boss is one of the most unforgiving Sonic bosses you can imagine. Because you're facing him while running, hitting him is a major pain in your butt, especially while dodging that stupid laser. Since it's long ranged, it can hit you from any distance, so you'll have to slow down to avoid it. Unlike with Cream, Knuckles, or Tails, Sonic has no way of floating in the air, and he has no long range attacks like Cream does, so avoiding his attacks is going to be a major headache. And unlike Knuckles and Amy, Sonic has to jump to attack, and that hand is easily the worst. Because it will keep slapping you away from the boss whenever you try to hurt it, and because sometimes it damages you like normal, and other times it's an instant kill. It's completely random which one of the two it does, and you can't even destroy the hand. Even worse, you have to beat as Sonic if you want to unlock Knuckles. So to all the diehard Knuckles fans out there, I hope you're prepared for the worst. And running out of lives against him will give you a one-way ticket back to the beginning of Sky Canyon, which is already a really hard level. This kind of difficulty should be saved for optional bosses or final bosses, not a random boss in this game. I've been waiting many years for another Japan-only Fire Emblem game besides Shadow Dragon to make it to America. Gaiden was one of the games I was looking forward to the most because of the epic with Mila's Divine Protection music in Brawl. And in 2017, we finally got a remake of Gaiden, which is known as Fire Emblem Echoes Towers of Valentia. The game itself is what you'd expect from a good Fire Emblem game. Cool characters, lovely music, interesting gameplay, and nice levels. Unfortunately, it didn't end off on a good note. In this game, you're divided into two groups, Alm's group and Celica's group. Unfortunately, for many chapters, we had already lost our ability to play as Celica and her awesome team. I was eagerly waiting for the next several hours for the chance to be able to play as her again. Now I finally get them back, and it's not as exciting as you'd think. Now, on its own, Ultra of Duma isn't really a bad ending, but the difficulty spike really shows. The level is one of the longest in the whole game, so I dare you to survive long enough to even get to the last third. And if you were unlucky enough to have saved your game right before taking on this chapter, you can't go back and level grind. You can't go back at all until you beat the level. Though, to be fair, the game does warn you about this before the final chapter, but they tell you that a little too early. Besides, even if you didn't save after the point of no return, you still don't have any chances to level up Celica's team. Weren't Alm and Celica both supposed to have their chance to shine in this game? Now, unless you're some kind of fortune teller who could somehow predict how much level grinding Celica would have to do before they took her away from us, you can't do much with her team, so Alm's team has to take care of everything. One last complaint I have to bring up. Hear this epic final battle theme? Yeah, when you're facing the final boss, it stops so it can play a not as epic final battle theme. I guess that sometimes, even a warning sign isn't enough to prepare you for the worst. Well, at least they tried. But unfortunately, the same cannot be said about what you're going to see in the second half of the list. Great, now it's time for me to talk about the final boss of Yoshi's New Island. Again, I liked Yoshi's New Island, but the hate for it is probably justified. The final boss is definitely one of the low points in the game. Now, how to explain my hatred for this boss without repeating myself? The first phase is dumb. Unlike the other bosses in the Yoshi series, there's nothing special about this battle at all. Even less special than the original's first phase, since ground pounding doesn't send tremors across the floor anymore. And the room's way too small, so there's even less fun to be had. Then there's the second phase. While I don't hate this boss as much as I did when the game came out, this boss is just the original fight, except with less intimidating shading. The platforms just shift slightly instead of being destroyed, and the threat of him getting too close is gone now. I mean, he's already pretty close to us, yet he doesn't even try to crush us. Then, after recycling the following cutscene, except with worse music, the future Bowser comes right out of nowhere and attacks you. The normal fight with him is not really bad, and I don't really despise the giant battle with him, but it's copied from the giant baby Bowser fight from before, which was already a ripoff of the original. And it's clear that this franchise does not understand that constantly reusing ideas does not equate to good final boss design. Can't we get just one Yoshi game where the final boss does not rip off the original? Okay, aside from that one. At least the other ripoffs of the original fight had something that sets them apart from the others. In Yoshi's Island DS, you at least had to make the eggs intersect. In Woolly World, you were going around in a big loop where you were aiming at the yarn powering him instead of at Bowser himself. And even in the somewhat average Crafted World, at least that boss had the slot machine gimmick and hitting it with giant hammers, while this one doesn't have much to make it different. With all these terrible ripoffs, it feels like this franchise is actively trying to ruin the original fight with every new installment. While the original final boss will always be a classic even in spite of all these ripoffs. But nevertheless, Nintendo, do us all a favor and find a different way to make a final boss in the Yoshi game. Xenoblade Chronicles may be a great game, but the bosses are the part of the game that I always dread. Unlike most video game bosses who actually feel different from the enemies, these ones just feel like normal enemies with more health. The gameplay mechanics are super confusing, and because of this game's bad collision detection, it's possible for any attack from enemies to hit you even when you're far away from them, and some attacks can kill you instantly. I almost want to smack my face when everyone shows up. When I think about terrible bosses in this game, 3 come to mind. Disciple Telethia, who I think is more hard than bad, Jadeface, who is the worst, but by then we'd expect horrible bosses, and the boss fight that earns a spot on the list, Tyrea and Solidium Telethia. This is arguably one of the hardest bosses in the whole game. You have to deal with 2 annoying bosses for the price of 1, and Shulk can't do much to Tyrea. He has to let his friends damage her. So just deal with the stronger enemy, the Solidium Telethia. But wait! While you're fighting it, Tyrea will be all over you. Even people who are over-leveled still had a lot of problems with her. The Solidium Telethia also has an unbearable amount of health. But what really hits the nail in the coffin is just how many annoying lines Tyrea spews throughout this entire fight, made even worse by the fact that Tyrea's voice actors sound like she had one of the worst microphones in existence.
Take my power and eliminate them. You'll never be emperor. Be gone from my sight. Be gone from my sight. Be gone from my sight.
Please, shut up! I just don't understand why Monolith Soft thought this equates to good boss design. And judging by the bosses we got in the sequels, it seems like they didn't learn how to design better bosses. It's actually a miracle that the Yaldabaoth fight exists in this game, so at least this game has one good boss. I thought Kingdom Hearts 3 was a pretty good game. It had some nice bosses, the gameplay was good for the most part, and I'm very glad we got to visit Arendelle. But I do have somewhat mixed feelings on the ending. On one hand, the Labyrinth segment was pretty neat, and it did feel like an epic climax. On the other hand, the Xeno clone segment amounted to a bunch of pointless padding, and what they did with Kairi was just unforgivable. So, in the beginning, Kairi was a good friend of Sora's, but she was also your typical damsel in distress. So then, Kingdom Hearts 2 came along. She got kidnapped again. But she did try a bit harder, and even got her own Keyblade. That's a step in the right direction. Kingdom Hearts 3 even built up to the promise of her being much better. I was excited to see what they did with her when we got to the part with her in it. And what do? Nomura, you cannot be this stupid. You advertised that she'd be much more useful, only to be kidnapped again, before she even had the chance to prove herself on the battlefield. There were 17 years of build-up, and we got this. Just a reminder, these Killjoys don't have to be gameplay only. Now, do I blame Kairi for this? Well, not entirely. I mean, she did technically save Sora earlier, and she is going up against some of the strongest enemies we've faced. I'm mainly blaming Nomura for not giving Kairi enough chances to prove herself. But unlike Lily, who was a new trainer, Kairi was taken to a realm with infinite time, so she literally had all the time in the world to train for this. And it didn't pay off. We didn't even get to see any of her Keyblade training in this game. And even in the upcoming downloadable content, where it said that we might be able to play as a couple other characters, there's so currently no sign of being able to play as Kairi. I am one of the few people who did shed a tear when seeing Xehanort kill Kairi, but that still doesn't make up for pushing her to the side like that again. Especially after finding out that she's still alive somewhere. How does that make any sense? We saw her die. And in case I get accused of being a feminist, wanting female empowerment doesn't automatically make someone a feminist. And besides, a lot of people were also mad at this. So I think my complaints are justified. Overall, the only thing this managed to accomplish is help me keep my tradition of making at least one countdown with an entry the year the countdown was released at least once a year. If you even know what I mean by that. As much hate as Sticker Star and Color Splash get, they're pretty fun in my eyes. Though Color Splash did take some steps in the right direction, but I'd probably prefer this game if it weren't for the worst mechanic in the series. Or in this case, Kamek. Oh, who am I kidding? Bad puns aren't enough to subside my rage from this terrible mechanic. Some Einstein decided that they should use the idea from the Kamek bells in Sticker Star and make us put up with it throughout the entire game. Whenever Kamek shows up, he'll do one of a few things. For one thing, he can make every single one of your cards worn out, and the problem isn't fixed even after you win the battle. He can also take away most of your cards until you win, and that's the least terrible thing he can do. And even then, it can cause you to be stuck there doing nothing if you run out of them. But what's the worst? When he flips all your cards over, so you won't know what moves you're using until they're used up. You have saved up a lot of super powerful moves for a boss, but will likely end up wasting it on these fights because of stupid Kamek. You can't even run away from the battle. Who thought this would be a good idea? If it weren't for him, the gameplay wouldn't have been so torturous. One thing that RPGs are all about is the battles. But because they don't give you any signs of when he will or won't show up, this system will make you always want to avoid battles. I mean, technically people might always want to avoid battles in traditional RPGs anyway, but at least in those games you usually gain experience from winning battles. In this game, you don't really get anything from winning battles except for some coins which you'll just use to replace the cards you already had, and admittedly some paint scraps, where if you get enough you can have more paint with you. But that'll barely do much, since paint is pretty much everywhere anyway, so you almost never run out of it. This is just one of the worst mistakes they've ever made in a Mario game, and I have no idea what they were thinking. Is there anything that could possibly kill any more of my joy than this? Man, I really need to shut my mouth every once in a while. Nintendo was really slipping last year. They only made 4 games that actually interested me. Only one of them even came close to its predecessors, and the game that could have been 2018's crowning achievement would have been so much better if they didn't make most of the game be overshadowed by World of Light. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this is, no joke, no exaggeration, the worst Smash mode we've ever gotten. Especially since it takes up so much space on the game's cartridge, so it's probably what we have to blame for the removal of target tests, event matches, all-star and home run contests. And let me tell you, the trade was not worth it. While the maps are kinda cool, the fact that they're being wasted on an already wasted mode is just a shameful disgrace to all these amazing games being represented. The mode itself is pretty much just fighting a series of battles. Now that would be okay, but let me sum up how the length goes. Okay, time to begin our journey. Wow, 2 weeks in, we're not even done with the map yet? I sincerely hope it gets better. Alright, I beat Galeem! It's finally over! What? You can't be serious. Well, he shouldn't take much longer to reach. Stupid game! Okay, I've beaten Darkon too. Now the game is finally over. You've got to be kidding me. Okay, this better be the end of it. Nope, still got more battles. Finally! Well, there's a month of my life I'm not getting back. Yeah, this big Christmas game? Well, this mode is more likely to ruin your Christmas than anything. Wait, there's an even harder difficulty? No thank you. I think I'd rather be spending my time on something less redundant, like Sonic 06. Even with the impressive amount of stages and characters we have in this game, this mode's so long that the battles still manage to get redundant. It doesn't even have a good story to keep you wondering what'll happen next. The story is really bad. It's literally just your generic light versus darkness battle, with the only twist being that they're both bad. And Galeem is actually an even worse villain than Taboo. He just one day thinks, wow, what a beautiful day! I'm just going to randomly decide to kill off everyone to make a new universe, or something. We don't even get any cool scenes of characters interacting with each other aside from the intro scene, which amounts to false advertising. Subspace Emissary took like a week or two to beat, but it had several cutscenes keeping you wanting to play. This game takes over a month, and barely has any. I understand it was because of idiots who leak cutscenes, but I'd rather avoid spoilers for weeks than to subdue myself to this kind of torture. And I know they said this wouldn't be like Subspace, but they said it in a way that sounded exciting, but it wasn't. And don't even get me started on how unbearably cheap some of the matches tend to be. This mode is literally the only thing on the list that drags this game down 3 tiers. What could have been an A+ or even an S rank gets dragged all the way down to a C+. Because this is what you'll be spending most of your time on because of the length. I only played through this mode because I felt like I had no choice but to play through it. Especially because of the removed modes like I mentioned earlier. Now, I did hear a defensive argument saying it was probably meant to be played in small intervals. That sounds fine, only one flaw. How in a million years were we supposed to know this? They did a terrible job at telling us this. Is this Sakurai's way of punishing us for begging him to give us another story mode? Because if that's the case, you can't punish everyone for what some people do, and regardless, it's bad to make something terrible on purpose. It really challenges my patience with Sakurai, and the only thing that keeps me from being completely mad at him is because I understand that he put a lot of really hard work into making Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But that still doesn't undo how repetitive this mode is. In fact, it tests your patience so much that even some of Subspace Emissary's haters actually started to love Subspace Emissary because of how it does almost everything better than this garbage. And what's more, it even gets me worried about the future of story modes in normally non-story based games. Especially after seeing the story modes in Team Sonic Racing and Mario Maker 2, which weren't bad, but Team Sonic Racing doesn't have enough actual cutscenes and focuses more so on just text boxes with voice acting. And Mario Maker 2's story, well, I guess we shouldn't expect a story more complex than just building a castle. Like this one, that one barely gives you any more motivation to finish that story mode than this one does. Now I have to wait another 4 or 6 years for Smash 6 to come out and undo all the damage that World of Light did to my brain. That's assuming that Sakurai even gets to learn from his mistakes with this, considering the amount of White Knights defending him from constructive criticism. I'll admit the fanbase has acted violent, but there are also plenty of people who have valid complaints towards this. I am at 5% the second, and World of Light is my biggest video game killjoy.
You will die.